In today's video, see what it's like inside an abandoned nuclear power plant, which also happened to be the set of an iconic movie from 1989. Also a symbol of economic decline gearing up for a better future, but first let's visit what are now the ruins of a war long over. The Moncel Forts. These rusting and decaying structures, located on the Thames estuary, are reminders of the darkest days of World War II. Part of the Thames Estuary Defense Network, the anti-aircraft tower forts were constructed in 1942, with each fort consisting of a cluster of 7 stilted buildings surrounding a central command tower. All of these towers were connected by catwalks, by the way. Originally, there were 3 of these forts, but only 2 are left standing: the Red Sands Fort and the Shivering Sands Fort. While all of these forts were decommissioned in 1950, a few pirate radio stations did find it to be perfect headquarters. Nowadays, the remaining ports just sorta stand there, but they've seen a bit of action lately. 2003, the Project Red Sands organization was formed with the aim of protecting and possibly restoring the Red Sands Fort. And also, more recently, the Shivering Sands Fort was occupied by the artist Stephen Turner for 36 days in 2005. He described the project as an experiment in isolation and wrote a blog and a book about the project. And in 2008, The Prodigy filmed a music video at Red Sands. Cherokee Nuclear Plant. In South Carolina stands the shell of what was supposed to be a very productive structure. The Cherokee Nuclear Power Plant was a project started by Duke Powler in the early 70s. It was supposed to be comprised of 3 reactors, with a total output of 3,817 megawatts of power. After spending a total of $633 million, construction was halted in 1983 due to economic problems. Only one of the 3 reactors was partially built before the entire project was actually shut down. Years later, though, the plant got a new lease on life, but not for its original purpose. 1987, director James Cameron chose the site as the location to film the movie The Abyss, more specifically for the underwater sequences involving the submerged drilling rig. The crew had actually modified the plant's empty turbine pit to hold 2.2 million gallons of water, but apparently it wasn't big enough. So, the crew then modified the original containment vessel for the reactor chamber, which was now much bigger, to hold 7.5 million gallons of water. Both massive tanks were eventually used in the film. Belitz Military Hospital. The abandoned Belitz Military Hospital has been abandoned for almost 30 years now, but its 125-year history makes sure that it's never forgotten. For one, it was once the largest treatment center in the world for lung diseases like tuberculosis. During World War I, it was actually used as a military hospital, and you might know one of its former patients, some guy named Adolf Hitler, some jerk from World War II. Either way, he was actually taken to the hospital when he was wounded in the thigh by a shell blast during the Battle of the Somme. If only they couldn't save him. The complex served again as a military hospital during World War II and was then occupied by the Soviet military for 50 straight years. The Soviets then abandoned the site in 1995, and although select sections of the hospital are now used for research and rehabilitation, most of the complex has remained virtually untouched for nearly 30 years. The 142 Magic Bus. Hauled into the wilderness by a construction company in the early 1960s as a backcountry shelter during a short-lived road project along the area Stampede Trail, bus number 142, also called the Magic Bus, would soon be abandoned and forgotten on the far side of a boggy, river-soaked parcel of public wildland, attracting mainly moose and local hunters. However, one of its other claims to fame is being famous for being called home by Christopher McCandless from April 1992 until August 1992. McCandless's full story is told by the book Into the Wild by John Krakauer and also in the movie Sean Penn made in 2007. In a nutshell, McCandless chose to live a life off the grid and basically starved to death while living in the bus in the middle of winter. Go figure. This dilapidated bus became a place of pilgrimage. Tourists come from the other side of the world to visit. The trek to this bus is difficult and dangerous, so due to public safety concerns, the bus was removed and relocated to the Museum of the North. Apparently, the local government got pretty tired of rescuing dumb tourists when they got stuck in the forest looking for the bus, or of course, stuck by the local river. Battleship Island. About 9 miles from the city of Nagasaki sits an abandoned island, void of inhabitants but steeped in history. Also known by its real name, Hashima Island, or by its other more ominous nickname, Ghost Island, it housed a coal mining facility during its heyday from the late 19th to mid-20th century. The island is also home to a hospital, school, and restaurants, now all in great disrepair. Its dark history started in World War II when the island was used as a prison for Korean and Chinese POWs. All of these POWs were also subjected to forced labor, and some of them didn't actually make it. Made to work under the harsh conditions, it's estimated that over 1,000 workers died on the island between the 1930s and the end of the war as a result of unsafe working conditions, malnutrition, and exhaustion. It was deserted overnight after the closure of its coal mine in 1974, though. All that's left is fallen facades of buildings that expose abandoned places littered with reminders of their inhabitants. Shoes remain where they were kicked off, half-read newspapers litter the floor, and once-loved posters slowly peel off bedroom walls. Presidio Modelo. This place's name literally translates to model prison in English, and that's what then Cuban president turned dictator Gerardo Machado envisioned. Each building is a circle of prison cells surrounding a center watchtower. The idea behind the design was that the watchtower would be darkened, making it impossible for the inmates to tell if they were being watched. The theory was if inmates feel that they're being constantly watched, the less likely that they are to start trouble. Each of the circular buildings were designed to house up to 2,500 prisoners. Most notable of these prisoners were Fidel Castro, his brother Raul, and other survivors of the rebel attacks on Moncado Barracks. With Castro's rise, the Presidio Modelo was used to hold political dissidents, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, counter-revolutionaries, and any other enemies of the dictator. The population quickly ballooned to more than 6,000 inmates. The feeling of constantly being watched didn't actually have the desired effect, though. Riots broke out in the prisons in 1961 due to overcrowding, and in 1966 they were permanently closed by the Cuban government. Today, the buildings remain open as a museum and a national monument. Project HARP Space Gun. Project HARP, which stands for High Altitude Research Project, was a joint initiative between the United States and Canada to research the use of ballistics to deliver objects into the upper atmosphere and beyond. In other words, they made a big gun to shoot things into space. Designed by mad ballistics engineer Gerald Boll, the gun itself was originally built from a 65-foot-long, 16-inch naval cannon, the same kind that would be found in battleships. The cannon was later joined to another barrel, extending the length of the gun to 130 feet. Admittedly, this comically long barrel is pretty much useless for military applications, but it seemed to be perfect for chucking objects into low orbit. At its apex, the gun was able to fire an object at a staggering 112 miles into the sky, setting the 1963 world record for gun-launched altitude at 93 kilometers. Many of these space guns were built all over the US, all of which were then dismantled when they found much better ways to send things into space. One such gun, however, survived and now lies abandoned in Barbados. The Barbados gun was abandoned in the late 1960s and left to rust on its original launch site, and after years of neglect, looks more like a painted sewer pipe than a Godzilla-sized gun barrel. Only a tiny bit of the barrel is still visible today, with most of it being hidden by undergrowth. St. Nicholas Church Bell Tower. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Who in their right mind would build a church on a really small island in the middle of a lake? Well, no one, really. What you're seeing here is the only surviving remnant of an ancient monastery built long before there was even a lake there. Underneath the waters of the Uglitch Reservoir lie two monasteries built in the 15th and 16th centuries. When Stalin moved to modernize the USSR in the late 1930s, a dam was built on the upper Volga River, flooding an area roughly 249 square kilometers. Most of the buildings and structures were destroyed or covered by the waters. However, one section of the St. Nicholas Cathedral rose above the man-made lake, its bell tower. Since 1939, this flooded bell tower near the small Russian town of Kalyazin has played the role of nautical marker, man-made island in a man-made lake, swim spot, and tourist draw. The inside of the tower is bare, as things inside the structures were removed before the water rose, but it still occasionally hosts to Orthodox Christian ceremonies. Pyramiden. The archipelago of Svalbard, located halfway between mainland Norway and the North Pole, is home to about 2,145 people, around 1,000 polar bears, and one seriously chilling ghost town called Pyramiden, so named for the pyramid-shaped mountain nearby. The town came to prominence in the 1930s when the Soviets took ownership of the area's coal fields and started mining. After World War II, they started spending more money to develop the area, building hospitals, cafeterias, and houses, all in the block-style fashion typical of Soviet-era architecture. They also built graveyards, not only for humans, but also cats. But the coal mines were never profitable, so the town started spiraling downward as soon as it started. The biggest hit came in 1996 when an airplane flying from Moscow to Svalbard crashed en route, causing the death of all 141 passengers, many of them Pyramiden residents. The tragedy slashed morale and the site was fully abandoned over in 1998. Whalers Bay. Whalers Bay barely fits the criteria of being an abandoned city, but its long and colorful history is too good to pass up. The town was built on an active volcano in the South Shetland Islands, just off the Antarctic Peninsula. It's horseshoe-shaped, and with a large flooded caldera, it opens to the sea through a narrow channel forming a natural sheltered harbor. It's one of the few places on Earth where ships can sail directly into the mouth of an active volcano. Since the early 1900s, Whaler Bay served as a destination for whalers who used the bay to process whale carcasses. A Norwegian whaling company even established a permanent station during this time, setting up houses for the workers and installing giant boilers. These boilers are actually used to extract oil from whales. It was abandoned in 1931 due to lowering whale oil prices, but the bay's history doesn't end there. Several countries fought over the island during and after World War II, but then everyone threw in the towel after a volcanic eruption in 1969. Today, the place is a stopover for Antarctic cruises, and you can even disembark here for a couple of hours to take in the cold, bleak, and honestly creepy sights. Buddha in a Tree. Ayutthaya is around 50 miles from Thailand's capital of Bangkok. The place makes for a popular day trip for those looking for a spot of culture beyond the usual sights and sounds of the country. The city is home to many temple ruins and old statues that gives visitors an idea of the grandeur this place must have once possessed. However, there is one unusual yet discreet attraction here, which later ended up being the place's most popular feature. Within the temple grounds, you will notice one tree that is constantly under guard. This normal-looking banyan tree is actually hiding something near its base. If you look closely, you'll see a Buddha statue seemingly being devoured by the tree's roots. A striking sight with an enduring effect, it's speculated that it was entwined in the roots after a thief abandoned it there and never returned. While this particular thief wasn't as successful at stealing this now famous Buddha, others unfortunately were. Gangs of looters have already stolen a lot of treasure from the ruins, forcing the Thai government to impose stricter security to protect the ruins and its heritage. Thamestown. Okay, I know what you're also thinking. Just how can an English town named after one of the world's most famous rivers go abandoned? Well, simple really, it's not in England. This quaint town is, of all places, in China. In fact, it's less than an hour away from Shanghai. Thamestown is one of several European-themed copycat towns built to give wealthy residents a chance to live in Europe without leaving the country. There's a Dutch-inspired Canal Line neighborhood, a Paris replica complete with a 300-foot Eiffel Tower, and even a small slice of Sweden. This includes spired churches and Nordic houses included. Inside Thamestown is a scale replica of Christ Church and even statues of William Shakespeare and Winston Churchill. And of course, those iconic red telephone boxes that are scattered all over. Seemed like a good idea on paper, but all these projects ultimately failed. In fact, barely anybody actually lives in all of these cities. People can still visit and walk on the cobbled streets though, quiet and abandoned as they are. Carey Furnace. This oddly beautiful mass of rusted and twisted metal is just one part of the Carey Furnaces, a long-abandoned steel furnace in Rankin, Pennsylvania. In their heyday, they produced up to 1,250 tons of steel a day until they finally closed in '78. Most of the 400-acre sprawling complex was actually razed to the ground in order to make way for planned developments that never actually materialized. However, the actual furnaces still stand are on an extremely rare example of pre-World War II iron-making technology. The furnaces were designated as a National Historic Landmark in 2006, and preservation efforts are underway. The furnaces are currently under the management of the nonprofit Rivers of Steel Heritage Corporation, a group that showcases the artistry and innovation of southwestern Pennsylvania's industrial and cultural heritage. You want to visit the place? Rivers of Steel conducts guided tours of the furnaces from May through October. Krakow. Krakow was founded in the 8th century and sits on a cliff 400 meters off the ground. People who lived there were treated to breathtaking views every single day, and the place was easy to defend from the barbarian hordes which ravaged Italy during the time. But of course, it wasn't without its disadvantages. Exposed to the elements along with earthquakes and landslides, the city was living on borrowed time either way. Even as it lies abandoned, the storied history of the town was left quite a monument to medieval architecture through the ages. The striking castle was built in 1300 and dominates the view on the cliff. Along with the castle, a church in Krakow houses a statue of the Virgin Mary that was remarkably discovered in a nearby body of water. 6 festivals happen in Krakow from May to October, paying homage to the Virgin Mary, which are basically the reasons why people still flock to the abandoned city to this very day. Before we move on, I've got a little challenge for you that'll take 5 seconds to complete. So here's the deal. You just leave a like on this video, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, and you will get 20... Michigan Central Station. Possibly the most photographed abandoned building in Detroit, the massive train station known as Michigan Central Station has stood empty now for more than 30 years. Once a popular and bustling business hub, the abandoned shell has become a symbol of Detroit's economic problems. Essentially, you can't have nothing in Detroit. The station was designed at the turn of the last century, part of the popular City Beautiful urban planning movement inspired by Chicago's 1894 World's Columbian Exposition and its romantic, neoclassical white city. The movement focused on beautifying urban spaces and erecting monumental grand buildings, and was particularly prevalent in Detroit, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. For the first 20 years of its life, MCS was a source of civic pride and an elegant example of the growing city's potential. Hundreds of trains passed through the station each day at its peak before World War II. Beginning in the middle of the century, however, rail travel began to fall off. On January 5, 1988, the last train left the station and the building began its second life as a symbol of the decline of Detroit. This means it was open to passerby looting until 1995 when a fence was finally erected. And then, knowing Detroit, they probably sold the fence anyway. Today, however, the place is owned by the Ford Motor Company, who promised to develop the place into a facility focused on developing self-driving vehicles, which will promptly be stolen. See you guys next time!